2025 was an exceptional year for video games, with an output so prolific I could barely keep up. What that left me with was the most fun year of gaming I've had in a very long time. Today I want to honor this in what I hope will become a channel tradition by talking about every game I played throughout the last 12 months. I'll give a quick rundown of my thoughts on each and rank them as I eventually determine my ultimate game of the year. With almost 50 completed games between new releases and my backlog, we might be here a while. So let's get started right away. Pizza Tower is a delightfully weird indie platformer that was an absolute blast to play. Each level consists of you making your way to the marker that begins pizza time, where you must then race back to the start. The sense of speed you can get as you string together the different combos and abilities is awesome. Combine that with the great art, animation, and music, it was a really enjoyable experience. The base game is fairly short, but there is hundreds of hours of content here if you try to go for all the perfect ranks. Admittedly, I did not really engage with this, I just made it through each level, doing the best I could and moved on. For this reason, I already know a hardcore Pizza Tower fan would tell me I haven't even started the game, but I still enjoyed my time with it and think it's a must-play for any fan of platformers. Pizza Tower gets an A. I had played Tomb Raider 2013 before, but I replayed it for my reboot retrospective video I made this year. Since I covered my thoughts extensively there, I'll keep this short, but yeah, I have always been a fan of this game. It may not be the most faithful Tomb Raider adaptation, but I think the more action-oriented gameplay is very fun. The criticisms it gets are valid, such as the fact that a game named Tomb Raider had barely any tombs whatsoever other than some side collectible areas, but for me it's just a great shoot things and watch explosions kind of game. You know what I mean? I'll give Tomb Raider 2013 a B. Released as part of PlayStation's classic games catalog, Sly 2 was super fun to play through. Part of me feels like I may have preferred the simplicity of the first game, but that is surely just nostalgia talking because Sly 1 was a childhood favorite of mine. Band of Thieves took me 17 hours to platinum, which was way more than I expected, so I definitely got my $10 worth. At the time, I said in my notes that I loved how PlayStation was bringing back so many of these classic games, but since then, this output has fallen off a cliff with like one new game per month, which is super disappointing. Anyways, I'm going to give Sly 2 Band of Thieves a B. Continuing on with the Tomb Raider reboot trilogy with the second game, which also just so happens to be my favorite. I think Rise of the Tomb Raider is a fantastic experience, improving on the first in every way. I felt they were able to strike a much better balance between the new age action and the old school Tomb Raider puzzle solving. In my opinion, the story and characters of this entry were much more engaging than the first game as well. Before I revisited the series, I would have told you Rise of the Tomb Raider was the best one, and after playing them again, I firmly solidified that stance. The second game of the Survivor trilogy gets a strong A rank from me. Carrion is a super unique reverse horror game where you get to play as the monster. You are this grotesque blob of flesh that wreaks havoc throughout a space station. You get a great power fantasy as the monster grows stronger and gains new abilities. What really stood out to me about the game was its pixel art and rotoscope-esque animations, giving it a visual style that I've never really seen before. I found some segments to be a bit frustrating, but overall it was a very good experience that I would recommend. I can confidently say you have not played anything quite like it. I'm going to give it a B. While Stellar Blade may be most famous for its sexualized main character, there is genuinely a pretty great action game here that is very much worth playing. The combat is absolutely top-notch, with an interesting fusion of stylish and flashy action game movement alongside the more methodical dodging and parrying of a Souls-like. Stellar Blade is not without its flaws. I felt it was a bit bloated at times and didn't care much for the open world sections. I also found the story and dialogue to be quite hit or miss, but that's not really what I'm playing an action game for anyway. Stellar Blade can be a bit inelegant, perhaps as a result of this being the developer Shift Up's first console release, but they were able to pull it together into a final package that worked quite well for me personally. This was a tough ranking, but I'm going to be a little generous and give Stellar Blade an A, because despite some issues, I did become quite enamored with it during my playthrough. For the finale of the Tomb Raider trilogy, we have my first game of the year that I did not really enjoy. Shadow places a much larger emphasis on exploration and puzzles, giving it a more classic Tomb Raider feeling, which was initially welcome, but strangely they seem to have forgotten about the action. There were multiple hours-long stretches of time with literally no gunfights at all, and it made the experience pretty boring. Even when there were action moments, the gunplay felt significantly worse than the prior games. I also thought Shadow was a pretty awful finale of a trilogy, as it introduces tons of new characters and plot lines while giving very little conclusions to what came before. It makes the game come across as just another entry in a series, not a culmination of a trilogy. Frankly, if I had not been playing it for the retrospective video, I probably would not have finished it. Shadow of the Tomb Raider gets our first D rank. I'm not sure what exactly put Infamous back into my mind, but I decided to return to the game that made me first want a PS4 back in the day. I remember being so excited for this, but then never even finished it at the time. So I changed that and got the Platinum along the way. I thought it was a decent experience. Definitely not the highlight of the Infamous series, but still a fun entry. I think what put me off the most is the writing is shockingly bad, and some of the story beats did not come together. One moment that sticks out in my mind is when the main character Delsin has an argument with his brother, who gives a whole speech about how he's not going to help anymore. I then went to the literal next waypoint marker, and it starts a cutscene where Delsin's brother is back and decides he's going to help again. So it was just little things like that that kind of took me out of it. But at the end of the day, the gameplay of Infamous is so great, it really didn't matter. And I still love how substantially these games can change based on the choices you make along the way. Second Son gets a B. Rift of the NecroDancer is in many ways the quintessential game for a fan of the rhythm genre. There is the main Guitar Hero style mode, Rhythm Heaven inspired minigames, and of course many elements you will recognize from the NecroDancer series. What makes the game different from its inspirations is that each note is a different enemy type, all with their own distinct characteristics. Some enemies need to be hit more than once, some will move off beat, and much more. This makes the game quite difficult, as you not only need to stay on beat, but also remember what each note is going to do as they come towards you at blistering speeds. It was extremely addicting trying to nail each song. I was also super impressed by the amount of content available for what I consider a very reasonable price. I feel like this game went kind of under the radar this year, which is a real shame. Rift of the NecroDancer took a ton of things I like, crammed it all together into a well-priced package, and found a way to still feel distinct despite its very many obvious influences. And for those reasons, it gets my first S rank of the year. For some reason, I always had this interpretation of Alan Wake in my head that it was one of those cult classic games that isn't actually all that great, but was loved by its core audience. However, I was proven very wrong, and I ended up enjoying it way more than I thought I would. It's a super bizarre game, both in gameplay and story, but in typical Remedy fashion, it all comes together and just works. I thought the combat system of using the flashlight as an armor break before attacking the enemies was extremely well done. And what that led to was a horror game I found both scary and fun to play, which is not always the case for me personally. Alan Wake Remastered gets an A. Monster Hunter Wilds was probably the most FOMO purchase I have made in quite some time. I have almost no experience with this franchise aside from playing Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate on Wii U for like 2 hours. But I saw a lot of the hype around this game and had several friends playing it, so I decided to jump in. And I think that context is really important for how I felt about it. Wilds was definitely built with first-time players in mind, something that I'm sure bothered hardcore fans of the series. But since I fit into the exact mold they were trying to cater to, it unsurprisingly worked extremely well for me. Monster Hunter has always been an IP I was very intimidated by. It seemed impossible to get into, but Wilds was able to do so, and I really enjoyed it. In the end, I will say that Wilds may be a flawed game depending on your perspective, but I was in love with it, and it has definitely made me a fan of this franchise going forward. At the time, I noted it was my game of the year so far, although this was in February and would soon be past. While I did really love it, I don't know that I loved it as much as some of these next games coming up, so I'm going to go with a very strong A rank. Death Stranding is a game I put off for a long time, unsure if I would like it. Before starting, I heard so many people say you need to get through the first few hours, or stick with it even if you don't like it at first. But my playthrough was nothing like that. Within probably 5 minutes of the first walking sequence, I was all in. Death Stranding is a game unlike any other, unapologetically so. In a world where many AAA games are being designed to keep you engaged for as long as humanly possible, Death Stranding stands tall in asking the player to take things slow and embrace the mundane. If you are willing to do so and play by its very strict rules, you'll come away with what I think is one of the most incredible gaming experiences ever made. I could talk about this game for hours, but we need to keep moving. S rank for Death Stranding Director's Cut. I'm a big fan of Metroidvanias, so I had my eye on this game for a while. I noticed it was going to leave PS Plus, so I jumped in, and overall I thought it was pretty good. The highlight for me was the 2 mass combat and ability system. Other than that though, it was kind of just exactly what you would expect from a game in this genre. Nothing terrible, but nothing revolutionary. It does tell a very personal story from the creator's life, which is a nice added touch to give the game that extra bit of soul. You can tell it was made on a bit of a tight budget, but if you are a fan of these kinds of games, it's a nice short and sweet experience. Tales of Kenzera Zao gets a B. 2025 marked the return to one of my favorite games, Returnal. I played it when it first came out back in 2021 and adored it, but unfortunately trophies were buggy at launch and I got screwed out of a collectible that could not be reset. This meant I had to delete the file and start all over, and with how tough this game is, I just didn't have the heart to do it at the time. But throughout all these years, I kept thinking about Returnal, a sign of how large an impact it left on me. And this year I finally went back and replayed it to get the Platinum Trophy. What this second playthrough solidified is that I think Returnal is an exceptional video game. The gameplay is so crisp, the audio design is incredible, and the leap developer Housemarque was able to make from their prior titles is so impressive. It is a roguelike, and in that regard, I actually think there are some pretty serious issues because there isn't the level of variety and progression between runs you expect from a game with that label. So weirdly enough, Returnal kinda doesn't work great as a roguelike, but the game itself is so incredible in what it does right, it outweighs it. Even all these years later, I still think Returnal is one of the best games of the generation and gets an S rank. I'm not sure what I can say about Clair Obscur Expedition 33 that hasn't already been said by myself and everyone else, but yeah, I absolutely loved this game. And contrary to those who say anyone who loves Clair Obscur must have never played a JRPG before, I'm a big fan of them, and I have a special affinity for turn-based RPGs with real-time combat elements. So in a lot of ways, Expedition 33 feels like a game that was literally made for me. Something that still stands out to me is that even in the best turn-based RPGs, I always have those few moments where I just want to skip combat for a bit and make some quick progress. But I never got that feeling from Clair Obscur because the systems are so endlessly gratifying and fun. And while plenty of games have incorporated these same real-time elements into turn-based combat, I do think Expedition 33 nails it in a way that few have. While the combat is certainly fantastic, it wouldn't be nearly as impactful if it wasn't for everything else around it. The world is beautiful, the performances from the voice actors were absolutely top-notch, and the music is incredible. In the months since I finished this game, I think what I've come to appreciate most is its reverence for the JRPG genre. You can tell how much they love this style, and I think the developers struck a really impressive balance of modernization without losing the inspirations of what came before it. I don't know if the story is as flawless as many seem to think, but it was certainly heart-wrenching and successfully made me care about these characters in a very deep way, which is the important part. Similar to what I just said about Returnal, I continue to think about Clair Obscur all the time, which is the clear sign for me that a game is not just great, but truly special. Expedition 33 gets an emphatic S rank. This was my first time trying the Onimusha series, and I thought it was a lot of fun. It had just that right amount of nostalgic PS2 jank, allowing you to get the vibe of the era without being overly distracting. And in that same vein, I felt the puzzles did a good job of towing the line of not being overly confusing to the point where you need to look at a guide every 5 seconds, while still making you think a bit. I noted my plans to check out the upcoming Onimusha 2 re-release, but with how crazy this year got, that did not end up happening. I still intend to play that though, hopefully before this new Onimusha game comes out soon. Warlords gets a B rank. Don't ask me why, but I randomly decided to play my first Sonic game in like 10 plus years with Sonic Frontiers. Overall, I felt pretty mixed about it. I thought some parts were really great, like the music and boss fights. Other elements of the game, like the open world map design, almost drove me insane. And I'm sorry, but the visuals of this game were extremely off-putting. It's an overused joke at this point, but Frontiers really is the epitome of the Nintendo hire this man Unreal Engine meme. And I still don't understand why so much of the platforming takes place on random structures that just hang in the air connected to nothing. But hey, I did find enough to like that I ended up getting the Platinum Trophy, so that counts for something. Sonic Frontiers is going into C for me. Well, we've made our way to June 2025, which saw the launch of Nintendo's brand new Switch 2 console, and the internet has been totally normal about it ever since. The internet has also been totally normal about its marquee launch title, Mario Kart World. I've already talked extensively about Mario Kart World in like 3 different videos, but the gist is, I think it's an incredible incredibly well-made game packaged incorrectly. The visuals, music, and new additions to gameplay such as wall riding are all flawless, and when played in very specific ways, make for what I think is possibly the best Mario Kart ever. However, the titular open world aspect did not work for me. The free roam mode is too empty and aimless to be enjoyed for longer than 5 minutes at a time. I do think if I was still a kid, this mode would basically be the coolest thing I've ever seen, but unfortunately I am now a grown-ass man. More importantly, the way they incorporated the open world segments into traditional races was a really bad decision that I've already talked about quite a bit. But I will say I do still really enjoy the Knockout Tour elimination mode and hope it remains a series staple going forward because it's seriously that good. Nintendo has been slowly updating the game to address some of these issues, and surprisingly we are still yet to get our first new content drop, so maybe this rating could eventually improve, but for now Mario Kart World gets a B. Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour is a tutorial for the Switch 2 that I paid $10 for. There are some fun mini-games, and I really appreciated the frequent factoids about the Switch 2 system, including incredibly in-depth explanations for why the console's designers made certain decisions, both creatively and mechanically. If this was pre-packaged on the system, it would have been a very cool introduction to this next generation, and I wouldn't knock it at all. Instead, it is a $10 instruction manual. So while I may have gotten a bit of fun out of it, there is no world where I can justify that price. Welcome Tour gets a D. Dead Island 2 doesn't do anything too crazy, but it's exactly what you want it to be. You walk around the map mowing down hordes of zombies with a great variety of weapons and mission types. Considering the development hell this game went through, it's a miracle it turned out as good as it did. Honestly, I was kind of tired of it by the end, but it was still enjoyable. I don't think I can go any higher than a B, but a serious shout out to the developers at Dam Buster Studios for pulling this game together and delivering a very quality product under some wild circumstances. Death Stranding 2 on the Beach quickly became my most anticipated game of 2025 after falling in love with the original earlier in the year, and it did not disappoint me whatsoever. Now, as I talked about in a prior video, there are elements of it that I think slightly take away from what made the original so special. Death Stranding 2 is more accessible and easier to get into thanks to better equipment and tools being available early on. While this makes for an undeniably better experience, it does remove that feeling of struggle, which was part of what made the first game so impactful for me. At the time, I felt like this sequel was slightly worse for that reason, but as I've marinated on it and spent nearly 100 hours getting the Platinum Trophy, I've really come to appreciate this entry much more. I think the story and characters are better, the upgraded combat makes the non-delivery missions actually fun, and the insane array of wacky tools available to you is peak Kojima. And as you would also expect from Kojima, it's presented to you with a visually stunning world and an incredible musical score. So while I do stand by the fact that the early game unlocks dilute the delivery progression, literally everything else about this game is drastically improved. The more I played Death Stranding 2, the more I loved it, making it a very easy S rank. I was actually a bit skeptical of Donkey Kong Bonanza leading up to its release. I was of course thrilled to see a new 3D Donkey Kong game, but I had some concerns. With so much of the marketing focused on the smash through everything mechanic, I worried it would be too gimmicky, or perhaps so hell-bent on destructible environments that it would lack substance. Thankfully, I was proven very wrong and got what would become my favorite game Nintendo has made in many years. Bonanza is a special game. It's so fun, so satisfying, and so joyous to play. It celebrates the entire history of Donkey Kong, while adding new elements and characters to love as well. And what I was most happy to see is that the levels are substantial and very well designed, while also successfully delivering on the promise of nearly everything being destructible. To have both those things be true is a masterclass in game design and extremely impressive on a technical level. The 40 hours I spent 100%ing it absolutely flew by, and I was shocked to find out it had been that long when I checked my playtime. Bonanza is Nintendo at their absolute best. A true system seller for the Switch 2, and yet another S rank in what started to become an incredibly stacked year. Ninja Gaiden Ragebound came out of nowhere for me. I had given it basically no thought before it came out, but saw it on a stream, thought it looked cool, and gave it a try. It's a great retro-inspired game, a terrific homage to the old-school 2D Ninja Gaiden games, and something any fan of that era needs to play. One thing I really appreciated was that it kept the difficulty you expect from a retro-inspired game like this this without ever feeling overly frustrating. And don't worry, for those masochists out there, you can bump up the difficulty if you want that true, unforgiving NES feeling. I think my only complaint here is that it's too short, not because I didn't get my money's worth, but because I just didn't want it to end. Ninja Gaiden's return to 2D gets an A rank. Is This Seat Taken is an adorable indie puzzle game that I really enjoyed. As you'll notice from my list so far, I usually do not play puzzle games on account of the fact that they just make me feel incredibly stupid. But this game was more like a collection of brain teasers as opposed to super complex riddles that require a master's degree to solve. In fact, I was actually able to perfect every level of the game without a single guide, which I must say I was quite proud of. It's a very short game, but it's also appropriately priced for what you get, and I definitely recommend it. Is This Seat Taken gets a very solid B. I was extremely excited for the long-awaited return of the Mafia series, and the Old Country delivered on exactly what it set out to be. I have long said that every game chasing the open world trend needs to stop, and that bloating your games with hundreds of map markers was not the way to go. I've just never related to the feeling that a game being longer automatically meant it was better. All of that is to say, seeing Hangar 13 take a step back from what they did with Mafia 3 and return to the linear roots of the series was absolutely the correct decision in my opinion. There were tons of better games than the Old Country released this year. Games with better graphics, more refined gameplay, and a much higher level of innovation were all over the place. But in terms of a game delivering on its intended vision, I'm not sure any nailed it more than this. Simply put, it is a Mafia game that brings precisely what any fan of the series would want. Great story and performances, fun gameplay, and an immersive setting. For just $50, how can I possibly complain? This prequel gets a resounding A rank. I have heard a lot about Chibi-Robo over the years, but never picked it up thanks to its insanely high price on GameCube, so I was really happy to see it added to NSO, allowing me to play it for the first time. And all the hype about it being one of Nintendo's hidden gems was totally true. In Chibi-Robo, you play as a helpful robot tasked with cleaning up the house and making your family happy. But this simple concept quickly turns absolutely wild, with Toy Story-esque household items that come to life, a couple on the brink of divorce, and even an alien abduction. A lot of the gameplay centers around a day-night cycle with different storylines and events taking place in each. This adds a management element where you are trying to get things done before the clock runs out, which I found very addicting. Chibi-Robo is a one-of-a-kind game, and I'm glad to have finally experienced it. B rank for this classic. Honestly, the only reason I bought Reloaded is just for how insane it is to see Gears of War as a physical PS5 game on my shelf. Truly wild times we are in. But it was also fun to play through this game again. You can definitely start to feel the age, but it holds up. And having the PvP multiplayer mode included was a nice touch because that has not always been a guarantee with re-releases of games from this era. I still wish this had been a full franchise collection though, or at least the original trilogy. Gears of War Reloaded gets a B. As you would expect from Giant Squid, developers of Abzu and The Pathless, Sword of the Sea is another visual masterpiece. And the typical floaty movement you get from this team combined with the surfboard mechanic was a genius idea. If you're looking for a game to zone out on and flow through a pretty world with satisfying movement, you need to play Sword of the Sea. It's one of those games where I really do question anyone who tries to say video games are not art. A rank for Giant Squid's most recent title. After nearly 100 hours of platinuming Death Stranding 2, I was somehow still in the mood for more physics-based walking/climbing simulation. I might be slightly sick in the head, but Jusant definitely scratched that itch. It was a pretty cool game. The way the character moved and controlled gave me some Team Eco vibes, so if you like those games, you might want to give it a shot. B rank for Jusant. I have been meaning to check out Robocop Rogue City for a while. Overall, I thought it was decent. Not the greatest game I've ever played, but still enjoyable. I do think it would hit a lot harder if you grew up watching these movies. Without that context, it's kind of just an average first-person shooter. They did nail the feeling of playing as Robocop though, I'll give them that. For me, Robocop gets a C, but that could be a lot higher depending on your personal experience with the IP. On first glance, one could argue Yotei plays things too safe, or is a bit derivative from a gameplay standpoint, and it is quite similar to what came before it, in terms of its open world exploration, combat, and collectibles. But as someone who adored the first game, I'm actually happy to just get more of that. It's in many ways a textbook sequel, not trying to reinvent everything, instead refining what came before. What that leaves you with is improvements across the board. And that's not to say they changed nothing. Obviously, Yotei takes place with a totally new cast of characters. I really connected with Jin's story, so I was initially unsure about this change, but I ended up clicking with Atsu as well, and felt her more confident, cold-hearted demeanor was an interesting parallel to what we got from Jin's journey of self-discovery. One of the key new additions was the bounty side missions, and those were a real highlight. Going after the different targets, each with their own unique background and history, was much more engaging than any of the side content we got in Tsushima. Yotei is of course also a visual spectacle. Sucker Punch's way of making in-game sequences feel like you are playing a game trailer will never stop being impressive. Overall, I don't think Yotei does a whole lot to change however you felt about its predecessor, but that also means if you loved it like I do, Yotei will be exactly what you wanted. S rank. I have had an interesting last few years with the Pokemon franchise. The last couple entries of this childhood staple have let me down beyond belief. Even the ones people swear are actually good, I just could not get into. Legends ZA caught my eye though, specifically the real-time combat system, something fans have been wanting the series to try for what feels like forever at this point. And here's what I'll say. There is a whole lot to criticize about this game. Locking the entire map to just the city was a strange choice. The graphics are terrible, and the fact that this series still refuses to embrace basic features like voice acting is long past unacceptable. But even with all of that in mind, I would be lying if I told you I didn't have a damn good time playing this game. The real-time combat worked great, and was the exact change to the formula I needed to get back into Pokemon again. I also thought the Wild Zone and Battle Zone mechanics were super well done. Going to every Wild Zone and catching each available Pokemon there, and battling through the waves of trainers during the Battle Zones never got old. So while every criticism you've heard about this game is absolutely valid and accurate, video games are supposed to be fun at the end of the day, and I had a lot of fun playing Pokemon Legends ZA. The most fun I have had with this IP in probably over 10 years, so I am giving it a solid B. This was my spooky game for the Halloween season, and it was great. To be completely honest, I don't know if I'm as high on it as some are. I thought it was very good, but not quite the total masterpiece many say it is. I think for me, there was just a bit too much downtime at points. I also thought the constant jump scares felt out of place in a horror game like this one, but it is still a Remedy game, and no one makes games quite like them, which I very much appreciate. And despite some of my problems with it, the highlights here were unforgettable. A rank for Alan Wake 2. After I made my video about Media Molecule and Dreams, it put me in the mood for their games, so I returned to Tearaway Unfolded. It's a great platformer. The best word I can describe it as is clever. The use of the controller, the puzzles, the world, all of it was super creative and fun. For some reason, I always thought this was just a port of the Vita version, but it's really more of a pseudo-sequel or reimagining of it. So for the most part, it feels right at home on PS4. The only thing that bothered me a bit is there are constant parts where the game wants you to draw something, which would have worked perfectly on the Vita's touchscreen, but the touchpad of a PlayStation controller is just not precise enough to make something that I was ever actually happy with. Other than that, it was a flawless adaptation. As much as I love and appreciate what Media Molecule did with their creative tools, I do hope we can get more traditional games like Tearaway from them in the future. Unfolded gets a B. This breakout-inspired indie game became my favorite new roguelite in years. Ball Pit has everything you want from a game like this. It's fun, satisfying, and has lots of content and unlockables to discover. There are many elements you'll recognize from Vampire Survivors, such as collecting gems to level up and evolving your items to eventually fuse them together. But unlike a lot of the Vampire Survivor copycats out there that are far too similar in my opinion, Ball Pit found a way to stand out and bring something different to the table. If I had one criticism, it would be that the game gets quite easy once you unlock a couple specific permanent upgrades, and at that point it becomes less about trying to overcome each level and just about putting in the hours to complete everything. The gameplay loop is still so gratifying as you watch the light show of different balls and effects flash across the screen that it stayed entertaining regardless though. The second I completed everything, I already found myself wanting to buy it again on PlayStation and do it all over. With how busy the end of this year was for games, I couldn't justify it right now, but that will almost certainly be happening at some point soon. Easy S rank for Ball Pit. Somehow 2025 just kept on getting better with a dispatch from Ad Hoc Studios. I was a huge fan of Telltale back in the day and would play all of their games. It's been sad watching the choice-based interactive story style slowly fading away over the last several years, so to see it return with a game as high quality and well made as Dispatch was just awesome. I had some concerns when I saw the voice cast littered with mainstream celebrities and social media influencers because sometimes that doesn't end up going too well, but it really worked. The performances were excellent across the board. Some of the writing can teeter the line of being a bit cringy, but the characters are so likable that it comes together. When you aren't making dialogue choices with the story, you get to play the unique Dispatch mechanic, where you strategically assign your superhero team members to help with distress calls across the city. Not only is this extremely fun, but it's also a perfect fit for this kind of game. You are constantly making choices when dispatching that lead you to unique outcomes and conversations. This was such a great idea and is so much more engaging than Telltale's old games where your time not spent in cutscenes was usually just walking around aimlessly clicking on things. There's a reason why this game blew up so much. The hype is well deserved. S rank, and please bring on Season 2 as soon as possible. Thanks. Apparently I was really in a Sucker Punch mood this year because I also went back to Infamous First Light, the spin-off experience from Second Son. It gives some nice backstory for the side character Fetch and has fun arena challenges that allow you to use the trademark powers of the Infamous series uninterrupted. But overall the game is extremely repetitive and not all that special. It's a decent quick platinum to go for if you're into that, but I can't go any higher than a C. Kirby Air Riders is a dream come true sequel that many thought would never actually happen. And just like what I said about Mafia the Old Country, I think it deserves credit for having a clear vision and achieving it to perfection. Air Riders is stuffed to the brim with content, with 4 main game modes featuring tons of unlockable characters, skins, machines, and cosmetics. But despite all Air Riders has to offer, I would say probably 80% of my playtime has just gone towards City Trial because it really is that good. I made a whole video explaining why I think this game mode is so genius, but the easy summary is that the insanity of it makes no two matches feel the same, and keeps you having to constantly adapt in ways you rarely see. So many multiplayer games nowadays feel like everyone is running around with whatever weapon, character, or vehicle TikTok told them was the most effective. But in City Trial, you don't get to pick what items spawn near you, or what machine you end up on. I find that so refreshing and fun. Part of me wants to put Air Riders in S simply because I don't see how a Kirby Air Ride game could realistically be any better than this. But as much as I love it, I don't think I enjoyed it as much as some of these other games up top. So Air Riders is going to get a very, very strong A. Windswept is a fantastic Donkey Kong Country inspired indie platformer starring a duck and a turtle. The music, visuals, and difficulty are all as good as you would hope. There is also a ton of content here if you want to go for 100% completion. My main complaint holding back this game are the controls. There are too many buttons required for certain abilities and it too frequently slows down the action. For example, if you want to use the move where the duck picks up the turtle and tosses him upwards, you have to press a button to make the duck your lead character, then press a button to pick the turtle up, then another button to actually throw him, typically combined with a jump as well. So long story short, you end up pressing 3 or 4 different things just to do one move, and it doesn't flow together in the way I want it to. You get stuck fiddling around with which character is in front, what button you're supposed to press, and end up performing the wrong attack often. This is especially frustrating in a 2D platformer where you're trying to get into a rhythm with your jumps and movement. Still a very fun game though, and a definite B. I told you earlier I'm a sucker for turn-based RPGs with real-time elements. Sea of Stars fits that description and is an awesome modern take on the SNES era of JRPGs. Beautiful pixel art graphics, an amazing OST that you may have noticed sneaking into the background of my videos ever since I played this, and a really endearing cast of characters. Sea of Stars came out a few years ago and I honestly have no idea why it took me this long to play it. Easy A. Cosmic Invasion is a super fun arcade beat-em-up. If you're a Marvel fan, you will absolutely love it, as there are a lot of underserved characters represented here. I feel like ever since the MCU era, we kinda just see the same few characters used over and over, but this game has some I have not seen in a very long time, like Nova and Beta Ray Bill. They also did a great job of making each character feel distinct and fitting to their abilities, while all still being viable. I do feel it was very short for the price tag though, only taking about 4 hours for a full playthrough. If you're gonna go for all the challenges and trophies, there is some decent replay value, but be warned, if you're not into that, this is likely a one sitting and you're done kind of game. It was a good time though, it gets a B. Oh, Metroid Prime 4. Easily my most frustrating gaming experience of the year. Prime 4 was never bad enough that I wanted to quit playing, but it was also never great enough to fall in love. There are so many moments where the game feels exactly as you want it to, but it's constantly broken up by so much of the exact opposite. For example, you start the game in an unknown world, all alone. As you explore this first area, it is peak Metroid. That iconic feeling of isolation is firing on all cylinders, and the atmosphere fills you with so much anticipation as the mysteries of the story begin to reveal themselves. However, you then get introduced to Miles, and suddenly you're in an action flick with your quirky sidekick who never stops talking. Then, right as you start to think, oh man, they ruined it, Miles goes away for a bit, and now you've been teleported back to a Metroid Prime game. But after a few hours of that, you find yourself driving around an empty desert hub world in complete silence for 15 minutes. And the entire game is basically this cycle on repeat. A couple hours of a great Prime experience, split up by 15 to 30 minute intervals of bizarre and out-of-place nonsense. And that is why I use the word frustrating. I've played plenty of bad games in my time. You say, damn, that sucked, and move on. But Prime 4 hurts, knowing that it had everything it needed to be great. I also think it's worth noting that essentially everything good about this game is what was already good about the older Prime entries, and basically everything new they added either hurt the experience or was a net neutral. So in that sense, it categorically failed as a sequel. Prime 4 gets a very sad and unfortunate C rank from me. Bits and Bops is a very cute indie love letter to Rhythm Heaven. If you love those games as much as I do, you'll really enjoy this. It's simple and nowhere near as good as those games, but the spirit is there. I do wish there was a bit more content, but I'm still happy to have supported the team. Honestly, Nintendo should cut them a check, because playing this got me even more excited for the new Rhythm Heaven game coming to Switch in 2026. For now though, Bits and Bops was a nice little snack while I wait. B rank. I could not explain to you a single thing that happened throughout this game's story, but who the hell cares? Doom the Dark Ages was a blast. I really respect this modern Doom trilogy for trying something different with each new entry. Do you know how easy it would have been to just make Doom 2016 3 times? People would have happily eaten it up, myself included. But instead, they found ways to make each game feel unique. When it comes to the Dark Ages, the key difference here is its medieval theme with a larger focus on blocking and parrying. Many worried this would slow things down too much, but for me personally it worked, and I think the slightly slower pace actually fits the Doomslayer character quite well. The standout for me were the weapons. I mean, there is a gun that crushes skulls to use as ammo. How could it get any cooler than that? My only complaint would be I probably could have done without the flying and mech segments. They weren't horrible to the point of ruining the game or anything, but I did often wish I was just back on the ground playing the game normally. But again, this wasn't game ruining, as these segments are short and infrequent. Overall, I loved my time with the Dark Ages and already want more Doom. id Software has nailed this franchise's formula, and for as long as they want to keep making these, I will most certainly keep buying. I'm going with an A rank for Doom the Dark Ages. Unbeatable is a rhythm game set in a world where music has become illegal. What you'll immediately notice is the incredible visual style that pops off the screen. I've never seen a game that looks quite like this one, and it's so cool. I feel like I should give a warning that anyone buying this needs to be aware the story mode is really more of a visual novel than anything else. There are, of course, rhythm sequences, but they are surprisingly rare. I loved the story that was told, but felt it was a bit poorly paced. And that brings me to my main conclusion about Unbeatable. This game is pretty clumsy. There are times where it doesn't load right, flat out freezes, or lacks polish. But in a weird way, this ends up backing the story's themes of creativity and the often perilous act of making something worthwhile. It leads to a really interesting artistic experience because of this, even if it wasn't always intended. The good news though is the arcade mode has been absolutely on point and allows you to play all the great songs to your heart's content. If they had just been able to find a way to incorporate the songs more consistently across story mode, this could have been a grand slam. But if you like rhythm games or this visual style intrigues you, I would still say to check it out. I'm going with a B rank. Wow, okay, we finally made it. Nearly 50 completed games entered the arena, and only one can be named my top game of the year. And the choice is frankly pretty clear. Mind's Eye, baby, game of the century. Okay, no, just kidding, it's Clair Obscur. Yeah, I get it. You're all sick of hearing about why Expedition 33 is the game of the year. But you know what? Sometimes things are extremely popular and widely praised because they deserve it. The emotion they were able to convey with the performances and music was just unmatched. It's the kind of experience that reminds reminds me why I love this medium so much, and an example of what makes gaming truly special. I have to give a shout out to both Donkey Kong Bonanza and Death Stranding 2 though. Each of those games would have very easily been my game of the year if they released in basically any other year in recent memory. But when you look at the excellence of Clair Obscur and take into account how much I personally enjoy this style of game, there was just no way anything was going to pass it. I hope you enjoyed this look back at my year in gaming. I would love to hear in the comments about your favorites you played in 2025, whether that's new or old games. And as this will be my last video for the year, I have to thank you for the incredible support this channel saw over 2025. Watching this community grow and being able to share my thoughts with an audience is something I don't take lightly, and I am looking forward to another great year with you all in 2026. Thanks for watching.